This is a true story, the story of Fujita, an orphan in Japan. Fujita, from this day forward, a Christian leader in Japan. This is one of the greatest days of his life. He is being ordained to the ministry. Around him are his proud friends, rejoicing with him in the opportunity that lies ahead, rejoicing in the sending forth of a new pastor on a life of service. In their faces and in the face of Fujita shines the light of God. In their hearts are psalms of hope for the chapter now beginning. But what of the chapter just ended? Why did Fujita choose to become a pastor? Who was his inspiration? What will happen to him now? Where will his calling lead him? But first, how did it all happen? In Kumamoto, there is a home for orphan children which is called the Colony of Love and Mercy. In Japanese, its name is Jin. Here the children are gathered to say goodbye to Fujita. Now he has completed his apprenticeship and is leaving to take up his ministry. This should be a solemn occasion and one for prayer, but the children are still children. They want him to tell them a story, as he has done many times before. This time he decides to tell the story he knows best of all, his own story. As he begins, he smiles, thinking back over the sad and happy hours of his life.
My story starts long ago in the country village where I was born. My father died when I was still a baby. And when Mother took down the death notice from the door, we had to go on alone. My sister and brothers did what they could to help work our small farm. But I could do nothing. I was just an infant secure in my mother's love, nestled against the warmth of her back, and not aware that I was no longer a joy to her. There were 4 of us, and we were always hungry, always waiting for mealtime. We were happy and healthy, and Mother wanted only to keep us that way. To us, the rice and pickled turnips were simply good things we found in our bowls every day. We never thought of the long hours of toil Mother had spent to bring them to us. We never thought of anything but the taste of the food. Because life is so easy when you are young, and your problem's no more complicated than getting a spoonful of rice into your mouth. When the long day was over and the only warmth in our drafty house was beneath the quilts on the floor, Mother would gratefully unfasten the straps that galled her shoulders and put me tenderly to bed with my brother and sister. It was easy enough for us to forget the little cares we had and rest. But there was no rest for Mother. Every night a blanket of fear for the future clouded her thoughts. Every night she would go to her shrine and call to her pagan gods, asking for help in her struggle to keep her family together. But no help ever came. The tinkle of her prayer bell was only a sound that died quickly in the darkness. The days were long and weary and full of back-breaking work, with scarcely a pause. And I was always there, a constant reminder that there were 4 mouths to feed, a constant weight to drag her down as she labored, a burden making hard work even harder. Finally, the day of decision came. Mother did the only thing she could, although to do it broke her heart. She sought the judgment of the village elder. He was not a Christian. There were no Christians in our village. But he was a good man. He told her to take me to the Colony of Love and Mercy, where the Christians from across the sea would take care of me. For Mother, it was a bitter struggle to turn away from the old gods of her ancestors toward the true God, but she turned. A few days later, Mother carried me away from home for the last time. She began the long journey to the city, her heart heavy with regret and helplessness. At last, she reached the gates of love and mercy, gates which are always open. I was only 1 year old then, and I remember nothing. But I have heard the story often from my old nurse. Now, long after, I can imagine the grief that lay behind Mother's brave face. The desolation she must have felt as she turned her baby over to strangers, kindly though they were. I can hear her footsteps on the walk, the deliberate and shuffling tread of sorrow, as she carried me to the door of our children's home. A kindly nurse was waiting there. She understood. The two women were almost wordless. In her courage, Mother bowed and smiled, almost as she would have smiled over a cup of tea, although her heart was breaking. Talk could not have made Mother's sorrow less. Slowly, she walked away, turning once to take a last look behind her. I never saw her again. She died soon after she returned home. My life began again that day. I was no longer a hardship and a burden. They cared for me tenderly. I grew quickly, surrounded by the warmth of their love. In what seemed like a single happy afternoon, I outgrew the nursery and graduated to one of the cottages where the 5-year-olds lived. I learned to ask the blessing at our meals, to thank God who had sent the food, to thank Him for giving us so much else. Our house mother was really a mother to us, and we were a happy, united family. In our home, the boys and girls were equals, which is the Christian way. We grew up unaware of this because it seemed only natural to us, and good. But as we shared our benefits together, we were taught to share our responsibilities. Sometimes the work was only work, and we raced through it as quickly as we could. More often, the work was fun, and we loved it. We were happy on the day school began. We felt that at last we had grown up and that we were ready to face the wide world alone, no matter how difficult that world might be. After school, we cultivated the autumn crops we would share all winter. We learned the joy of working with our hands, of planting seeds and the fragrance of the broken earth. And when work was over, we scrubbed ourselves in good, warm water. Like any boys, we always managed to take a good deal of dirt from the fields indoors. Then we read fairy tales, looking as wise as our elders. In Sunday school, we were introduced to the Bible and the wonderful story of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Our teachers had already shown us how Christians lived, and we loved their lessons. But it was our beloved pastor who gave us eyes to see how the Spirit lives. He was blind. When he came to visit us, we felt proud to take his hand. Then he would speak and show us the truth. The room seemed filled with a light too bright for our eyes. It was his light, and it came from within. From our pastor and our teacher, we learned the way of love and hope, and thus our lives were molded. I kept on growing as a young tree grows in the spring. As rice grows when the sun is warm and the earth good. Soon I was a big boy of 13. I left the colleges and went to high school. There, for the first time, we proudly put on the uniforms of students. We walked the campus with high hearts. There were hundreds of us, all eager to follow the new paths before us. Our teachers were not like those in most Japanese schools. They never asked us to believe anything blindly. We understood when they showed us why some things are right and others wrong. This was a new way in Japan, a new way after centuries of rigid, blind tradition. But suddenly the blood-red banner of war was raised. They made us take down the picture of Christ. In its place, they put the emperor and the empress, a sword in the place of the cross. The missionaries from across the sea went home. Their houses were empty and boarded up. Our pastor, of course, remained with us. Sometimes when his heart was heavy with sorrow, he would go to those deserted houses and run his fingers over the boards, smiling, because he had faith that God's love would rule and the missionaries would come again. Japan became a machine, guided by godless men, a machine of hate. The brains and muscles of men were molded into the terrible pattern of war. I had to conform to the pattern. I had to work in a factory, making weapons for the armies of Japan. I worked and I sweated, and all my days were dark and empty. Then the air raids came. Then there was only the terrible silence of ruin, defeat, and death. The twisted girders and fallen buildings seemed to reflect the shattered faith of our people. When the war was ended, I was set free. I went back to help the blind pastor, to help bring Christ into the emptiness of the people's hearts. There was so much to do, and we could do so little. I made some picture cards which told stories from the Bible. And it was wonderful to watch the faces of the children when they saw them. The joy I felt working with them and the satisfaction of seeing those excited, happy faces gave life to my dreams. Then one wonderful day, the blind pastor received a letter. I knew what was in it as soon as I saw him, but still my heart leaped when I read it. It was the answer to our prayers. God was sending the missionaries back to us. Miss Maud Paulus, superintendent of JIN, was one of the first to return. The emptiness of the war years was over. The flowers we gave were only a small token, but they were a gift of love which said what our tongues could not. More and more missionaries returned. The excitement lasted a long time. Some of you remember it. Well, as soon as they were settled in their homes again, I went back. I had a great deal on my mind. I was so anxious to tell them of my dreams and hopes. Yet somehow I was afraid to speak until their warm reception opened my heart to them. I told them of the calling I felt, that I could hear the gentle call of God, that I knew Christ wanted me to become a pastor. They understood, and they were glad that I had been called. Imagine how I felt when Dr. Miller, dean of my old school, told me that I could go to Tokyo, to the theological seminary. Fortunately, the seminary had been spared the destruction of war. It was one of the first schools to open, and I was there. The opportunities ahead were so great that at times I couldn't keep my mind on my work, despite all my high intentions. My head was so full of dreams for the future. There were many of us in the seminary eager to fill the vacuum left by the war years. Eager to learn everything we could to help rebuild Japan on the solid foundation of Christian faith. It was a school well designed for quiet meditation and long hours of hard work. I began to study, resolved to waste not a minute of my precious time, because I knew that I must prepare myself well and firmly for the future. The months passed quickly as I bent over my books. Soon the days of studying drew to an end. Our work had prepared us to go forth and feed the flock, but still we asked, where? Where does God want us to go? But I don't think we ever understood the full scope of the possibilities open to us until Dr. Miller called us together and showed us opportunities in every corner of Japan. As he spoke, we could see the ruins of Fukuoka, block after block of desolation, the Japan of today. Then, rising above the wreckage, we saw the new church the Lutherans had built. A symbol that God was here and would care for his children. We saw one of the kindergartens of the church and the happy children playing, still close to God because they were fresh from his hand, but still in great need of him. Each of us asked himself, is that the place? Does God want me to serve there? When Dr. Miller spoke of our girls' school in Kumamoto, which is also in need of a pastor, we saw another chance for service. These girls were learning a new existence. They were breaking away from the feudal bondage which the women of Japan had endured for centuries. It was more than ever important that a pastor should stand at their side. At last, Dr. Miller spoke of an opportunity that lay close at hand. We could see the vacant lot where a church had stood in Kumamoto before the air raids. Suddenly, I saw the challenge rise like a banner before me. That would be my work. I would rebuild that church. I couldn't wait for the day when I could start work. But first, I had to serve a year's apprenticeship, working with an older, experienced pastor. And how fortunate I was to be able to come back here to work with the old man we all love. I started again with the picture cards. In our land, I think they are the father of the modern movies, and just as exciting. The pastor let me find my own way, but sometimes he came to visit us in the classroom. Then I sought his advice. We were all eager to hear his words. And when he spoke, the same light shone from within him that had guided me in my youth. When I saw the love and respect which radiated back to him from the children, I knew my own work had only just begun. I will never forget the day Miss Paulus took me to visit the kindergarten. She acted as though nothing unusual had happened, but now I wonder whether she was smiling deep inside. The children were singing one of their favorite songs, the one about how the cobbler mends his shoes. We stopped in to watch. It was good to see that the children were getting along so well. But then I noticed something else, something quite different. There was a new kindergarten teacher. Was this what Miss Paulus really wanted me to see? You know, I think it was. Anyway, from that day on, it was hard for me to see anything else. In my imagination, I saw just such a class as that in the kindergarten of my own church. And in the center of the picture was a wonderful girl such as this. But sometimes you must put your dreams aside when problems come along. And believe me, some problems can be very hard. The police brought us 2 boys. They were a very unhappy pair. They came from a little village in the country where they had been arrested for stealing. They had no families or pastor to guide them and scarcely realized that there was any difference between right and wrong. Somehow they seemed to be a special challenge to me. I took charge, determined to set them on a new path. They began to take to our way of life. Of course, they thought of themselves as a pair of important men who could not be bothered with our childish games. It was hard for them to learn to be what they really were, just boys. But after a few turns at bat and a few embarrassing moments in the field, they saw that they were not so important after all, and their shell of pride and fear began to disappear. Slowly, the boys learned to trust me. Bit by bit, they told me about their past. I was proud to feel that we had made a little progress, and as we got along together, I grew to know them like little brothers, and I liked them. I felt very happy in those days. My frequent excuses to visit the kindergarten were as rewarding, in a different way, as my work with the boys. The future promised to be just as I had planned it, warm and bright. On Sunday afternoons, we would go to the park and walk together, making still more plans. We talked of many things, since I was sure that we would build our future together, that she would be a partner in my work. I showed her the crude little drawing I had made of my church, our church, and we would dream of what it would really be like. It was on one of these afternoons that the bad news came. A messenger came running from the school to tell us that the 2 boys had disappeared. They had stolen again, some food and a pair of shoes. I was discouraged and deeply troubled, and I went out to hunt for them. The farmers knew nothing of the boys, but they showed me the path to the village. I walked on, confident that I had only to find the lads and speak gently to them. But I didn't count on my reception. No one wanted to help me. They were suspicious and afraid. They were deaf to my appeals for help. And I suddenly found myself a stranger in an unfriendly community. They couldn't understand that I only wanted to help the boys. I walked the village streets, meeting only unfriendly eyes and silence. But at last, I found the boys and saw that they too were unhappy and lonely. The hard shell of fear had formed around them again. They were sullen and unyielding. I tried to make them understand that they must return what they had stolen, and that they would be forgiven for it. I tried to make them see that there is always time to turn back. I tried, and I failed. They wouldn't even listen to me. I had to leave them. I went away deeply depressed because I couldn't help them. But I had no time for these sad thoughts. At last, all the arrangements had been completed for my marriage. How proud I was as I stood on the steps of my old school chapel, while my friends and teachers congratulated me. How proud I was of my pretty bride. And there you have my story up to now. But a lot has happened to me in these last few days. Now I know where God wants me to serve. I am not going to rebuild that church in Kumamoto. My place is in the country village where the two boys live. Someday I may return, but for now my altar must be in the fields, and my roof a tall wild tree. Well, here's the truck.
Man's travels across the earth are like the tracks of snails in the sand, but God takes note of them all. In particular, he watches those who go about his business. He watches over those he has called to do his work. He gives them courage and faith. So Fujita, the pastor, and his young wife enter upon a barren land. It is their task to fill the void, to sow the seed of the Lord upon ground that until today has borne little fruit, to help the sick and poor in spirit, to lift up their hearts, to be the instruments through which God works. This will be their home. You might think it a poor one, but they are proud of it and full of dreams. They have not set out for selfish reasons or in the hope of gain. For the reward is not in material things, in goodly houses or fine clothes. It is the satisfaction they feel in bringing the love of Christ to others. The first word is spoken and the first seed planted. Who can say whether it will thrive in this ground? Fujita can only hope and pray as he goes about his work, trusting in God who works through him. For Christians are the agents of God, the means of bringing a new life, a new way. The word is to be spread everywhere, among the farmers, the blacksmiths, the umbrella makers. What will be the word this man can understand? Shall it be said that, as your umbrellas are spread open to the sun to dry, so your soul is spread open to the warmth of God's love? The pastor's wife is also busy, already at work with the village children. She too must plant the seed in the child and in the mother, so that both may come to the Lord. In the streets of the village, Fujita walks and talks as Jesus did 2,000 years ago, when he spread his word among the people of Galilee. The church kindergarten is organized. A few children are already there, and this mother's smile means that others will soon come, to be welcomed by the Lord, who loves children best of all. The people of the village soon heard about the Christian pastor who was among them. They found his words good and saw that he was deeply sincere. One by one they paused to hear this new message as Fujita fulfilled the vows of his ordination. And into whatsoever house you enter, first say, peace be on this house. And in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. And say unto them, the kingdom of God is come nigh unto you. At last the time came for Fujita to announce his first Christian service. Boldly and with pride, he put up his placard on a tree in the public square. Only a few people came to this simple service, but if Fujita and his wife were disappointed, they did not reveal it as they gave the hymnals to their little congregation. Among those who had come were a few whose newfound faith was beautiful to see. How wonderful it was to have even a dozen gathered together in the name of the Lord, who had come of their own free will to worship him. The Japanese words of the hymn fall strangely upon our ears, but to God, all languages are one. Where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. The faith is kindled within them, in those who are still in the midst of life, and in those for whom life is almost at an end. It is almost time for Fujita to begin his first sermon. His little flock awaits his words. He reads his text from the Bible, but as he reads, there is the sound of footsteps, the quiet, eloquent tread of men marching without words. In the forefront are the two wayward boys, the boys who once turned away when Fujita held out his hand to them. Why are they returning now? What power brings them with their friends to this place? It is the Lord who leads his children by the hand, although they see him not. This is the returning, the reconciliation, and the finding of forgiveness. Fujita must go on with his sermon, but it will be different now, for God has written it for him. Before him sit these boys who have turned to a new way of life and brought others with them. What better theme could Fujita find? Fervently he tells of Christ the Savior. In his heart, he has faith that others, too, will turn from their former way of life and follow Christ, who said, I am the way. Our story ends here, but today Fujita and hundreds like him are preaching Christ in his way. The people of Japan are finding that the Christian doors of love and mercy are always open.